Welcome to our lecture on strategy processes. My name is Prof Kohtamäki, and this lecture is part of Strategy Work course in Strategic Business Development Master Program. The first slide is about contextualizing strategy from the macro to the micro levels, from the macro environment, clusters, industries, the broad environment, and the broad structural environmental issues that influence the strategizing at the meso level and then at the firm level. At the meso level, we have the ecosystem, the value system from raw materials to end products and customers, the customer and supplier network. And then at the micro level, we have the firm. So the interplay between the macro level and the micro level, and in between the meso level. Typically in the literature, strategies strategy literatures are divided into three streams: context, which basically refers to external context where strategizing takes place, and then of course the internal context of the firm. So internal and external, and the fit between the strategy and the environment. Content, which means the content of strategy that the firm is using, what types of strategies firms are using, and then the process means the process where strategies are being developed. So strategy formation, but also of course implementation and strategic change. This is from Igor Ansov's book from 1965, of course describing how strategies, perhaps the deeper in-depth philosophical idea of how strategies were seen in the 60s in a more stable business environments, perhaps a little bit more simple industries, where it was easier perhaps to try to plan forwards even in longer term throughout the years. These days, when in the digital environments, of course, the business environment is changing rapidly, and often we consider that in many cases strategies are crafted for 2 years time, 4 years time, or so forth. Of course, still there are some investment decisions where you really need to consider longer term, like 10 years, even 15 years, because the payback for the investment is just so lengthy. Of course, Mintzberg's work was in many ways also challenging the so objectivist and perhaps deterministic and deliberate idea of strategizing. That it would be possible to plan everything in a very detailed manner beforehand. Mintzberg challenged that, suggesting that only 10% actually realize in the way they were meant, and then 90% of strategies realize in some totally different way. So there is this idea of emergence, sudden, that has to be considered in strategizing. The emphasis on things that just happen, to which companies need to adapt, react. Perhaps early emphasis already in what is these days called as the agile strategizing. So adaptation, strategic learning, as Mintzberg calls it. Basically, the idea of Mintzberg was that and his famous notion was that strategies walk on 2 feet, one deliberate, one emergent. So you need to do both. They are not exclusive. But of course, the challenge was that often theorists and consultants forgot in the early days the role of emergence and strategic learning, the adaptation. And it's not to say that planning and deliberate wouldn't be important at all, but that it needs to be balanced in with the idea of emergence and strategic learning, to be realistic, to be grounded into what the company actually does. This notion is from Gary Hamel, who just pointed in one of his books that strategizing and strategy work should not be only about and should not be about only describing about the existing state of affairs, but it should be about reinventing something. So innovating, reinventing the way we do things in the future. So what the strategizing and business model actually is in practice, it's about the customer market, the customer. Who is our customer and what is our value promise to the customer? How do we create value? What is the idea? How do we intend to keep the value promise for the customer? What is our revenue model? What makes us profitable? How we intend to price the products and services we are using? The idea of the profit logic. So 4 main questions: to who, what, how, and why. Basic idea of strategizing. And of course, if you consider the main idea of low cost or differentiation that Porter had, you should see the differentiation in the value proposition, which is then kept. So these ideas are very much embedded and in interplay. This is another way of dividing the external and internal in the strategy literature. On the left side, you see the choice of position, which basically emerges from the industrial organization. And then on the right side, the idea of developing competitive advantage, the idea of the resource-based view. So the macro, micro interplay. In the macro side, you have the industry and trends, the clusters, the strategic groups, and value systems. And then in the micro level, you have the strategic capabilities, business model, and strategy implementation. And between these, you should find fit. So there should exist fit between the macro environment, the meso environment, of course, and then with the internal factors, the capabilities and strategy capabilities, structures, business model. This is the model from exploring strategy, which basically divides strategy process and strategy framework into 3 different main dimensions: strategic positioning, strategic choice, and action. So analysis, choice, and action. And in the position, you have the macro environment, the stakeholders, the culture, resources, and the industry. In choices, you have the corporate strategy, business strategy, internationalization, acquisitions and alliances, and then the innovativeness, risk-taking, proactiveness, entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial orientation. You make strategic choices, and then you implement strategy in action. So you have the organizing practices, the change process and leadership processes, and evaluation and follow-up and evaluation. In a little bit more simple terms, you have the strategic vision. What do we want to achieve with our strategy, to positioning, to the industry, to the value system, in the markets, strategic capabilities, where we are good at, what are our strengths, and then the strategy implementation. So 4 basic building blocks of strategy: the actual strategic vision, positioning, capabilities, and implementation. And when we move forward to a little bit more detailed processual figure, which I like, on the left, starting from the left, you see the stakeholders' expectations, shareholders' expectations, but also in broader terms, stakeholders, strategic vision, then the positioning and strategy and the business model and fit between those. So within positioning, you have the industry and trends, you have the clusters, the value system, and then strategy and business model. You have the customer value promise, resources and processes, meaning capabilities, and then the pricing value capture. You make decisions about the strategy and business model, which you implement. So you have strategy implementation, management system, and then the adaptation, meaning strategic learning. So these are the basic components. This is the strategy process as described here, from the shareholders, stakeholders, division, positioning, capability, strategy and business model, and strategy implementation, strategic learning and adaptation. So very brief presentation of what we mean in short by strategy process and how the concept of strategy process is part of the context and then the strategy content literatures. So we have the context, content, and process. Thank you.